When The Mandalorian premiered, it felt like a miracle. Star Wars fans were divided, frustrated, and exhausted after the sequels. And suddenly here was a simple story about a masked gunslinger and a tiny green child that managed to unite everyone. It was lightning in a bottle, the kind of success Disney had been chasing for years. Grogu became an icon overnight. The memes, the toys, the endless theories. It was a cultural tidal wave. Din Djarin's quiet journey from mercenary to protector gave Star Wars a new kind of hero, one built on honor instead of destiny. And for a moment it felt like the franchise had finally found its future. But that kind of success is dangerous. Instead of letting the story breathe, Disney tried to bottle the magic. They announced spin-offs, crossovers, and built a web of shows that turned The Mandalorian into a franchise hub rather than its own tale. What started as intimate character storytelling became a corporate strategy. The cracks showed quickly. The Book of Boba Fett was hijacked by Din and Grogu. Ahsoka leaned heavily on setup instead of payoff. Even The Mandalorian itself began to lose focus, as cameos and lore dumps replaced the smaller Western-style adventures that made it so unique. The fire was spreading, but it was no longer controlled. Fans noticed. Some still loved every reveal, but others felt the magic slipping away. The unity. The Mandalorian created fractured as debates returned about whether Disney was milking the franchise dry. The very success that reignited Star Wars was also the spark that exposed its biggest weaknesses. In this video, we are going to break down how The Mandalorian reignited Star Wars, how Disney's rush to replicate its success fractured the magic, and why this moment changed the entire franchise forever. When The Mandalorian premiered in 2019, nobody expected it to become the cultural phenomenon. It did. At the time, the Star Wars fandom was fractured by the sequel trilogy. Some people loved The Last Jedi, some hated it, and The Rise of Skywalker had not even released yet to settle or inflame the debate. Into that storm walked a bounty hunter in shiny armor and a tiny green alien who stole the entire world's heart. Suddenly, Star Wars was not an argument, it was a celebration. The genius of The Mandalorian's first season was its simplicity. It was a Western in space. Din Djarin was not a chosen one, or a Jedi or a Skywalker. He was a mercenary with a code trying to survive in the ruins of the Empire. Each episode had a self-contained story that slowly built toward a larger arc. It felt grounded, intimate, and character-driven. That smaller scope is exactly why it worked. And then there was Grogu. Within hours of the premiere, fans had dubbed him Baby Yoda, and he was everywhere. Memes, merchandise theories. It was an explosion Disney could not have predicted. What made Grogu special is that he was not over-explained. He was mysterious, cute, and tied to the Force, but still vulnerable. Every scene with him deepened the bond with Din and pulled audiences into caring about their journey. This dynamic was lightning in a bottle. The Mandalorian also felt authentic in its Star Wars roots. The design work, the music by Ludwig Göransson. The practical effects all felt like classic Star Wars without being trapped by nostalgia. Yes, there were nods to familiar species and settings, but the show carved its own identity. That balance was refreshing after the sequels leaned so hard on legacy characters and callbacks. Mando's galaxy felt lived in, not curated for fan service. Another key was the way the show embraced genre storytelling. It borrowed from westerns, samurai films, heist thrillers, and survival adventures. That flexibility kept it engaging because every episode felt different while still pushing Din and Grogu forward. The Mandalorian proved Star Wars could thrive when it let itself breathe outside the Skywalker saga. But maybe the biggest achievement was how it united fans. Prequel kids, original trilogy purists, even casual viewers, all found something to love. For the first time in years, Star Wars discourse was not about what was ruined, but about what was exciting. People actually wanted to talk about episodes as they aired week to week instead of fighting over what was canon. That kind of unity is rare in fandoms this divided. The Mandalorian also proved the streaming model could work for Star Wars. Instead of relying on billion-dollar box office runs, it showed that serialized storytelling could build hype and sustain engagement for months. Disney Plus owed much of its early success to The Mandalorian because people subscribed just to see Baby Yoda and stayed to watch what happened next. It was the definition of a runaway hit. And when you combine all of this, you realize why the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian felt so magical. They were focused on character, not spectacle. They introduced new lore without overwhelming audiences. They respected Star Wars without drowning in references. It was a careful balance that seemed almost effortless. But success like that rarely goes unnoticed. Disney looked at the wildfire. The Mandalorian started and decided they could not just let it burn naturally. They wanted to bottle it, expand it, and turn it into the foundation of an entire universe. And that is when the story started to change. Disney saw the reaction to Grogu and Din and decided The Mandalorian would not just be a hit show, but the cornerstone of an entire Star Wars television empire. The problem is that building an empire requires control, and you cannot control wildfire. The success of The Mandalorian was organic, born from its simplicity. Once Disney tried to industrialize that success, the cracks began to show. The first major shift was the flood of announced spin-offs. Rangers of the New Republic Ahsoka, the Book of Boba Fett, and even hints at more crossovers. Suddenly, The Mandalorian was not just about Din and Grogu's story, it was a launchpad for a Marvel-style, interconnected universe. Fans went from being excited about the next chapter to being overloaded with teasers about future content. That change in focus diluted what made the original work. The Book of Boba Fett is the most obvious example. Instead of a tight story about the galaxy's most infamous bounty hunter, the show turned into Mandalorian Season 2.5. The most talked about episodes were not about Boba at all, but about Din reuniting with Grogu. Disney could not resist pulling the plug on Boba's own story to fuel their bigger plan. And in doing so, they revealed that The Mandalorian's magic was propping up everything else. Even Ahsoka's show, though better received, followed the same pattern. Instead of standing on its own, it leaned heavily on threads from The Mandalorian and Rebels. Disney wanted synergy, but what fans wanted was focus. Every time the story widened, the intimacy of Din and Grogu's journey felt further away. That tension is what fractured the momentum. And then there is the issue of pacing. The Mandalorian thrived when it was allowed to take its time with small stories like protecting a village or chasing a bounty. Once it became the cornerstone of a larger universe, every episode felt like it had to set up something else. Cameos took priority over character beats and lore dumps replaced natural storytelling. The show started feeling less like a story and more like homework. Grogu himself became a victim of this rush. His separation from Din at the end of Season 2 was one of the most powerful moments in modern Star Wars. But instead of letting that decision breathe, Disney reversed it within months during the Book of Boba Fett. The emotional impact was gone because the corporation could not risk losing its most marketable character. That is the definition of short-term thinking over long-term storytelling. Fans noticed too. The same unity that The Mandalorian created began to fracture again. Some people still loved every cameo and connection, but others felt the show was losing its heart. Online conversations shifted from excitement to debate about whether the magic was gone. The fire Disney tried to spread was starting to burn out. The irony is that Disney had something powerful on its hands. The Mandalorian showed that audiences wanted smaller character-driven Star Wars stories, but instead of letting it stand, they forced it into being a franchise hub. That decision may have made sense on a spreadsheet, but it cost them the very thing that made the show resonate in the first place. And when you step back, you realize this was not just about one show. It was about the way Disney handles Star Wars as a whole. The Mandalorian lit the spark, but the attempt to mass produce it showed the limits of corporate control. What works organically cannot always be scaled. And Disney learned that lesson the hard way. The story of The Mandalorian is not just about Star Wars, it is about the dangers of success. When a show becomes bigger than the company expected, it changes the way decisions are made. Instead of asking what makes the story work, executives ask, how do we replicate this across everything? That shift is why The Mandalorian's fire burned so brightly, but also why it started to dim. Look at how the first 2 seasons handled legacy characters. Luke Skywalker's return in the finale of Season 2 was jaw-dropping because it was unexpected yet meaningful. It felt earned. But by the time the Book of Boba Fett and later seasons rolled around, cameos became routine. Luke Ahsoka, Cad Bane, Bo-Katan Thrawn teased on the horizon. It stopped feeling like story and started feeling like a checklist. That is what happens when success turns into strategy. The Mandalorian also highlighted a generational divide in Star Wars fans. Some embraced the crossover-heavy approach, while others longed for the smaller, intimate stories. Disney tried to serve both and ended up serving neither. The result was a brand that once again felt inconsistent. One week it was about bounty hunting. The next it was about galactic politics. That lack of identity undermined the very thing that made Season 1 so strong. And the truth is, this problem was inevitable. Once Disney positioned The Mandalorian as the centerpiece. When you make one show carry the weight of launching multiple franchises, you strip it of its freedom. The Mandalorian stopped being Din and Grogu's journey and started being the prologue to something else. That loss of focus is why many fans say the fire started to go out. But there is still a legacy to appreciate. The Mandalorian proved that Star Wars could thrive outside of theatres. It showed that a story about a bounty hunter and a child could capture the world's imagination without needing lightsabers in every frame. It gave us moments that felt truly fresh in a franchise that had been accused of stagnation. That achievement cannot be erased no matter how messy the spin-offs became. It also sparked projects that might not have existed otherwise. Andor owes some of its green light to The Mandalorian proving Star Wars could do long-form television well. Even shows like Ahsoka or Skeleton Crew exist because Din and Grogu proved audiences would show up. The ripple effects of that initial fire are still shaping the franchise today. The lesson in all of this is that success must be handled carefully. Lightning in a bottle cannot always be bottled again. The Mandalorian started as a small story and became a juggernaut, but in the process it lost some of what made it special. Disney's desire to control the fire ended up scattering sparks in too many directions. Some burned bright, others fizzled, but none recaptured that original glow. Fans will remember the highs, though. The first time Baby Yoda sipped soup, the reveal of Din removing his helmet, the return of Luke igniting his green lightsaber. Those moments defined an era when Star Wars felt united again. And even if that unity did not last, it proved it was still possible. So when we look back, The Mandalorian will be remembered as both triumph and cautionary tale. It reignited the galaxy's passion, but also revealed the limits of corporate expansion. The fire it started changed Star Wars forever, but it also showed that no one, not even Disney, can truly control a wildfire.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.